Warm Pacific greetings to you all, and I'm sorry to not be able to join you in person for this very important World Climate Conference. And it is a pleasure and a privilege to be able to address you and share some perspectives at the conclusion of COP28 on coasts as a hotspot in the climate crisis, as we look at the threat that climate change is to the livelihoods of coastal communities. In fact, in the Pacific, climate change has been highlighted by Pacific countries and Pacific leaders as the single largest security threat to our Pacific region. And in that context, we are talking about not just the impact of extreme weather, the impacts in terms of rising seas and saltwater inundation to our coral atoll islands and coastal communities in terms of plantations, but in terms of warming oceans, what that also means for our people in the context of food security. And I think that's something that often is missed when the conversation around food security or food sovereignty and climate change happens. And while there have been some important discussions taking place in Dubai just a few weeks ago, most of that has focused on agricultural crops, not in the context of those who depend on fisheries. The conversation around the marine space in the context of climate change has seen a slow inclusion of oceans into the climate change discourse, what we call the ocean climate nexus. But a lot of energy has been placed into carbon sequestration, blue carbon sequestration, so to speak. Looking at marine spatial planning and the idea of marine protected areas as a way of protecting areas that can be seen as carbon sinks. But this, unfortunately, does not address the issue of the need for urgent phase out of fossil fuels to keep at 1.5 degrees, the pre-industrial temperature level that we are allowed, really the red line for our coastal communities, and also in the context of the impact of warming seas on our coastal fisheries, and also deep water fisheries for that matter. We know that the currents are affected by climate change, and this is something that I think sometimes is neglected in some of the discussions that take place. However, as we reflect on the impact of coastal communities with sea level rise, with ocean acidification and ocean warming, this is a challenging issue that we already are seeing in the Pacific. As we have coral bleaching, and our coral reefs are at risk and start to die from the ocean warming and acidification. That places in danger the very species and fishes that our communities rely on, whether they are, coral reef fish or coastal fishing species, or whether they are things such as clams, seashells, and other food that our people rely on. And this is because most of this discussion that is taking place is from an economic perspective. And while livelihood does have an economic perspective, it is important to recognize that there are many communities that still rely on subsistence fishing and subsistence farming to survive, to feed families and communities. And so we continue to see, this issue being kind of sidelined in the conversations as the more dramatic areas of sea level rise and coastal inundation, extreme weather, etc., are highlighted. But long before we have the sea level rise, the shift and change that we see in terms of slow onset climate change impacting our marine areas is something that really needs to be taken into to consideration. You consider how much of the world relies on fisheries for survival. And, as our oceans get warmer, migratory fish begin to migrate further and further away. And this means, of course, that our fisher folk have to travel further and further from their homes and their communities in order to catch this fish. And that results not only in terms of added expenses, but it's also about time away from family. It's also about scarcity of resources and the fact that our people continue to be neglected in a lot of these discussions. For the Pacific churches, we've recognized that this really is an issue for our communities in the Pacific. And, as we see people being relocated from coastal communities further inland, the challenge for us is then, how do these people maintain some form of livelihood or subsistence economy when the source of their food is in the ocean? So usually when, and we recognize the significant impact of this on women in our communities who are at the forefront of the impacts of climate change in traditional communities. It is the women who go to the coast, to the shoreline to fish in most communities, and as they are moved further and further away from the coast in terms of climate-induced relocation or displacement, how do they then manage that journey to the coast to fish for their family? What is the issue of safety and survival or security, in terms of how these women are protected when they go to the shore or the coast to do their fishing? What is the significance in terms of transporting that their catch back to their communities that have been relocated? So these are just some of the issues that start to come up in the conversation as we look at the impact of climate change. So we have the actual physical impact of climate change in terms of affecting the ocean and the biodiversity within the ocean. We have the impact of climate change on communities that are being forced to move further and further away from the coast, and how that impacts their livelihood. And so we look at the issues of adaptation, of loss and damage, which are being discussed, and these are key issues that need to be taken into account. But ultimately, we need to maintain our mitigation approach, which is to reduce the carbon emissions that are impacting our ocean, our ocean space, as well as everything else. So I often say that it's important to engage on mitigation, just as it is to engage on adaptation and loss and damage. And it's quite concerning that when we are looking at the issue of the phase out of fossil fuel, people are not recognizing the huge impact that this is going to be having on communities in the context of fisheries and livelihoods. and the impact on coastal communities that survive, by fishing and planting, and that, this is not about economics. This is about survival. And so, as you reflect, on the issue of climate change, on the issue of the ocean and health for the ocean, we must never forget not just the immense work that the biodiversity under the waves does for our planet as the blue lung of this planet, but we must always remember also the lives of communities that depend every day for their food from the ocean. And it's unfortunate that this last COP, some of these ideas and concepts and these needs for the communities are not being addressed. So as we continue to journey forward now to the intersessional meetings for climate change and the UNFCCC in Bonn in June next year, and then of course to COP29, we really need to ensure that the climate-ocean nexus is really maintained in the forefront of a lot of these issues. I wish you well for the rest of your deliberations today, and may I also take this opportunity to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy